Hi everybody. Today we're going to sculpt in clay of all things. Nothing digital today, but well, maybe part of it will be digital. If you saw my video from last week, it was basically about identifying the forms of the head for the eye, the forehead, etc. And the whole thing I kept going on about are these simple forms like spheres and ovoids and cylinders and that kind of thing. And so it's very important to recognize those things and be able to find them, but you also have to be able to render them. And one of the sort of things I do in my classes and give assignments to students is to sculpt a sphere, a cube, and a cone, and try to just get them as clean as you can. They don't have to be perfect, but it's the idea of learning how to render it cleanly to the best humanly possible level. So I'm gonna do them on these little wood stands I made, just some scrap wood I had. I'm gonna use water clay, so this will help it from slumping down. If you don't have something like that, you can always just get some armature wire, bend it into a shape, glue that down to a block, and you're good. Also gonna use a couple of different tools for measuring. The first one is gonna be this pair of calipers, right? And you can get similar ones like this at your art store. And then the other one I'm going to use is what's called a surface gauge. It's got this little needle up here, and it helps you find a spot on the model and sort of scribe it, because you can leave it on the desk. Again, they're not that expensive, but if you don't have one or want to get one, you can just get a spool of wire and do a very similar kind of thing. You bend this to where you want, and then you can find that measurement. So that's a cheap way to go. And then I just want to show you my sculpting tools. Mainly to start, I'm going to use my hands. It's always the best place. And then I've got a couple of things. I've got, a palette, sort of spatula guy, big one, because these things are going to be about, the size of a baseball maybe. Got a loop tool, and I like them when they have the little teeth in them. And I don't know if you can see, maybe I ground in some little teeth in there with like a Dremel. I just like that because it helps move across the surface more than dig in. And another thing I like is just this little block of wood that I made, and there you can see too, I just put little serrations in it, again acting like a rake. So that's about it. I'm gonna go to time lapse and maybe talk through that a little bit, with a voiceover. Let's get going. this is about as far as I'm going to take these guys. They are by no means perfect, but it's a good study. Using various measuring tools and so on. Now, when you are using these forms and thinking about these forms in any sort of a character, they're never going to be absolutely perfect anyway. But this is a good exercise if you want to try to learn how to control the clay or the digital stuff as well. Hopefully this was useful. I'm going to show you a little bit of a slideshow from a previous lecture that also takes this concept and using these tools and so on to transfer 2D to 3D. So we'll take a look at that now.
Okay, so now I just wanted to show you a couple of things about these tools I'm using. Well, this is my collection of my main sculpting tools, and there's basically three different types of things going on here. You've got your loop tools, which are sort of like for scraping and carving. You've got your flat sort of spatula tools for making planar shapes and cutting. And then you've got these guys here, which are more like a finger. The shape is kind of rounded on the bottom. And then you've got brushes, which are actually kind of like rakes. These rakes that have the teeth in them, you probably saw in the video, the little scratchy marks, and that just helps it kind of go along the surface and not dig down. But when you're using these rakes and refining your shapes and so on, at a certain point you want to smooth them, and you can use various brushes for that with solvent or water, depending on what material you're using. But they're kind of like rakes in that if you use, like, let's say an oil brush, it's very stiff, and all those little bristles kind of are like little rakes, and then you can work your way down to like a sable or something really soft. So this is basically it, and here's a small dowel caliper that I use as well. So the next thing is using a silhouette and how to use all this information about measuring and being careful about forms. You don't have to do this, but I find it very useful. So if you have a drawing like this, in this case a really clean profile, this is a Peter Desev drawing from I think it was Ice Age 1. You would take that image and then put it on a piece of cardboard or foam core. You would blow it up to the exact size you want. And this case, I figured out the size of this, put it on a piece of board, and cut it out. When you do that, I'm going to jump ahead here. The ultimate use for this, if you want, is to really quickly find your silhouette and just throw those volumes in there and block it out really fast. But the thing I wanted to show you is using these tools as you go, whether you have a silhouette cut out or not. This is the height gauge or surface gauge that I showed you before. These are my sets of calipers. These are outside calipers and these are inside calipers. They're both very similar, but one kind of fits in a space more than the other. And like I said, these you can get something like this really cheap at an art store. These I happen to get at a garage sale. They're just old, really nice Serret calipers that I like. But you can get some cheap ones at an art store, and instead of an actual height gauge or surface gauge, which is probably $25 at a machine shop type store, you could also just use armature wire. So how this works is you have your armature set up on a stand, you have your art scaled up to size and mounted to a board at the height you want to sculpt it. And once you have that, you use your surface gauge and adjust it. All these little things can move. And so in this case, I'm pointing it to the very top of this dorsal area. And then you slide it across to your clay. And now you know exactly where that point is, at least just vertically, horizontally. And you just kind of go back and forth measuring then, let's say, the eye height, the top of the eye, the bottom of the eye, the corner of the mouth. And that way you'll be able to strike lines exactly in 3D space, well, at least in kind of 2D space where these landmarks are to help measure and transfer 2D to 3D. So that's kind of what I was doing when I was making those spheres and cubes and cone, and by using these tools, just trying to measure and help myself get a more accurate translation. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and I'll see you next time.